welcome to Gettin Legal With It, a podcast for Colorado young lawyers by Colorado young lawyers. I'm your host, Kevin Cheney. For those listening to us for the first time, I'm a personal injury and criminal defense lawyer here in Colorado. I graduated from the University of Colorado Law School in 2014 and founded my practice, Cheney, Galluzzi & Howard, LLC, a short time later. I'm a member of the Colorado Trial Lawyers Association, where I serve on its board, executive committee, and legislative committee. I also serve on the Colorado Bar Association's Board of Governors, the CBA Executive Committee, and the CBA Young Lawyers Division Executive Council. Finally, I'm also a member of the Colorado Criminal Defense Bar Association. If you're interested in learning more about any of these wonderful organizations, please feel free to shoot me an email at kevin@cghlawfirm.com. This podcast is created and sponsored by the Colorado Bar Association's Young Lawyers Division. Our goal with this podcast is to bring you bi-weekly episodes with information that is both fun and informative for young lawyers. We have some awesome guests lined up, and we are just getting started. All right, and with that, let's jump right in. I'm excited for our guest today, Mallory Hasbrook. Mallory brings her background in geology and prior experience working as an associate general counsel and as an escrow officer for a Colorado title company to her oil and gas, estate planning, and elder law practices. She has dealt directly with brokers, realtors, and lenders to draft escrow agreements and prepare closing documents, and has experience drafting all forms of title opinions, including drilling, division order, and acquisition opinions covering fee, state, and federal lands. Mallory utilizes her real estate and oil and gas title experience to guide her clients in creating their estate plans and assisting with probate and trust administration where real property and mineral interests are involved. She also advises clients with respects to guardianships and conservatorships. Mallory was born and raised in Oklahoma. She graduated magna cum laude from the University of Oklahoma in 2013 with a Bachelor of Science in Geology. In 2016, she graduated from the University of Oklahoma College of Law, where she served as editor-in-chief for the American Indian Law Review. Shortly thereafter, she relocated from Oklahoma to Colorado. Welcome to the podcast, Mallory. How are you doing today? Oh, I am doing great. It's just a couple of weeks into the new year, and, everything is going well. So I know we covered a little bit of it in your bio. Everyone always enjoys listening to their bio. But before we kind of jump into some of the different topics that we're going to talk about today, including kind of the diverse practice areas that you kind of work on, kind of just like to introduce you to our listeners. So why don't you kind of give them the 1 to 2 minute kind of background on who you are and how you ended up here?
Yeah. So I am the most relevant, I guess, the current chair of the CBA YLD. And I am originally from Oklahoma. I'm not from Colorado, which I guess most people these days aren't. But
fair.
So I grew up in Oklahoma. From there originally, went to undergrad there, law school there. Huge OU fan, so Boomer Sooner for anybody listening. But yeah, my husband and I both work in the oil and gas field. Him not so much anymore, but when I was still in law school at OU, he found out that he was getting either transferred to Denver with his job or he would be losing his job. So
one of those is definitely better than the other,
Yeah, not so much of a choice, really. But most of the people, he was working in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Most of the people in that office did decide to make the move. So at that point, we said, I hadn't committed fully to taking the Oklahoma bar yet. And Colorado was obviously a really nice choice to be given.
Sure.
We always thought oil and gas wise, we would end up, in Houston or something. So
right.
Denver was a much nicer option. So we decided to go for it. I finished up law school in Oklahoma, then moved out here. We got an apartment downtown and really didn't know what we were doing, but ended up moving out here. I think it was Memorial Day. Got here, started studying for the bar, and then took that a couple months after. So it was an interesting transition period.
Yeah, it sounds like you guys had an interesting year that year.
Yeah, we've been out here for probably 5 or 6 years now, and just love it. So it was a good move, but that's kind of how the Oklahoma to Colorado thing happened. Awesome. Yeah.
And tell me a little bit. So did you always know you wanted to be a lawyer, or how did you? So obviously, I think you got a Bachelor of Science in Geology. How did that lead to law school?
Yeah, so I originally did want to be an attorney. My undergrad, when I started in college, was poli-sci, thinking that I would go to law school. But I ended up taking an intro to geology class my freshman year that I just absolutely loved, and so much so that I ended up changing my major. But as I got towards the end of my undergraduate career, really the choice with geology is to continue on with your master's if you intend to go further in that route. And that's really not something I was interested in at that point. It was very research focused and just kind of didn't feel right to me. So I had talked to a professor that I had known for a long time, and she and her husband were both geology professors at OU. And they both had interesting paths. One had started out in psychology, then gone to geology. And they just both were very encouraging and said, you know what? If you're still thinking about law school, guess what? You don't have to have a poli-sci degree.
Right.
You can still go and do that. So that was kind of an eye opener for me. I didn't know. So I ended up applying to law school and stayed at OU for that because they have a great energy law program, and that was kind of where my background was at that point. So it just worked out.
So did you know, well, I guess that you kind of answered that question. So you knew you kind of wanted to do something with energy and kind of go into energy law using kind of the background in geology and things that you have.
Yeah. So I always intended to kind of stay in the oil and gas arena. I did love my undergrad and wanted to stay in that field. And like I said, OU, Oklahoma, it's just part of the territory there, really.
Sure, absolutely.
They have a great energy law program. That's something they really focus on. So it was just kind of a natural fit for me.
Well, that's actually a great segue to talk a little bit about what you do now. Let's start with oil and gas law. So obviously, I'm sure that is super broad, and there are a million different aspects to oil and gas law. But kind of where does your practice kind of focus? What do you do when you say I'm an oil and gas attorney?
Yeah. So just background on the firm that I'm with now. They are what they would call natural resources focused, which I think is indicative of most firms in the energy arena, at least in Colorado. If you are talking about oil and gas, really you mean natural resources, and really you mean all of these very different things, like you were saying. So my practice is a little bit more streamlined. After I passed the bar, the first place I worked out here in Colorado was actually a title company.
Okay.
So land focused, title focused from the get-go. And then after that, I joined the firm that I'm with now. So it's really very much title focused, at least for me, land focused. And that's kind of how those other practice areas that I've kind of delved into on the side, that's kind of how all of that ties back in, is on the title and land side of things.
So what is a kind of day-to-day life of, an oil and gas attorney? Like, are you guys in the courtroom? Is it a lot of research and kind of document review? Is there a lot of writing? Are you meeting with clients? Or, combination of all of the above? Like, what is the kind of typical day of an oil and gas attorney?
Yeah, so I would narrow that down into oil and gas title attorney.
Okay.
So my firm, like I said, they're very broad. They do have litigation in the oil and gas arena, but that's not something I've involved in.
Sure.
On the title side of things, typically there's not a whole lot of client interaction day to day. Your point of contact with your client, who's generally a company, would be like a landman or a land manager, whatever their title may be. And so you're receiving, when you do a title opinion, which is mainly what I do, you're receiving a set of abstracts from a third-party company. You're dealing with the landman at the client's landman, but you're looking through all of these documents and you're putting together a story essentially of ownership of what's happened in the lands that you're looking at, from typically it's patent to present. Sometimes it's an update. Sometimes it's sooner. There might be another prior opinion that's, from 10 years ago. So you're just looking from there to present, but you're updating ownership and providing that to your client to say, at the end of the day, here's who you have to pay.
Okay. And so when we're talking about a title opinion, just so that so that we can understand. So you're trying to figure out who owns either the land or some aspect of the land or the minerals under the land, so that a company that is trying to develop those minerals or mine them or whatever they're going to do can pay the right person, and there's not like a lawsuit later that says, hey, you paid guy A but guy B actually owned them or something like that.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. That's a good way to summarize it.
Got it. Super interesting. And you also do, from listening to your practice areas, you also do a lot of like estate planning and probate. How did you get into what at least sounds like fairly diverse practice areas. Is there kind of some overlap, or how did all that occur?
So they are very diverse practice areas, to be fair. When I kind of say like, oh, I do oil and gas and I do estate planning and probate, people tend to kind of give you that look like, what?
What?
They don't necessarily go together. So the firm that I'm with now is Wellborn Sullivan McIntooley. Like I said, natural resources focused. But they're big enough that they try to be full service to their clients. They try to do a little bit of everything. If we've got a client that owns an oil and gas company, but they also need their estate planning done, for example, we would try to handle that. So there was an attorney that joined our firm a couple years back, Nancy Peterson, who was my mentor. She had her own estate planning firm. And so she kind of wrapped that into Wellborn when she joined our firm now. And so I started working with her and found out that I really enjoyed estate planning and probate and all of those areas. So I was still doing oil and gas title work, but I was also helping her. So it just kind of naturally was this thing where I was splitting my time between the two practice areas. That being said, there is overlap between the two. I tend to end up with a lot of estate planning clients or, probate cases where mineral interests are involved.
Sure.
It's an area that's, pretty specialized, and the average, I would say, estate planning probate attorney isn't encountering that on a day-to-day basis.
Right.
That's where that kind of plays in. Some of the clients that I have, it's definitely, they're coming to me with a mineral interest issue at the end of the day.
So that would be a situation where, in addition to either money or stocks or whatever else somebody owns mineral rights.
Right.
And so when they're thinking about, if they pass away and leaving it to their heirs, like how can they protect that? How can they make sure those rights go to whoever they want them to go to?
Yep, exactly. And more often than not, I would say where it comes up in probate cases, it used to be the case where if you worked as a geologist or an engineer in the oil and gas industry, what they used to do to pay those folks was assign them overriding royalty interest in the wells they were drilling. Okay. So I had one it was a super interesting case a while back where the daughter of a geologist had come to me and she said, hey, my dad owns all this stuff, but we have to locate it. We don't know anything about it. So that's a pretty common scenario too.
Interesting. Do you enjoy, I guess, so obviously there is that some overlap, but do you enjoy having kind of the different practice areas? It would seem like, hey, if I'm getting a little burned out with, project A over here, I can switch and kind of work on some of these estate plannings or kind of vice versa. It gives you a little bit of variety. Yeah,
absolutely. And they are very different in terms of the day-to-day because oil and gas title work is a lot of document review, I would say, versus estate planning or probate, you've got a lot of client interaction. So that having that balance has been really, really nice. It is nice to be able to kind of put down one project and go to another and have it be in kind of a completely different arena. There's a lot of variance in your day, which is nice. Right.
Yeah. I would also assume that it makes you, a more valuable, I guess, employee. I mean, because not only are you doing the oil and gas stuff, the estate planning stuff, but then also sounds like you kind of have this niche of like estate planning, oil and gas stuff.
Yeah, it's very unique. I would say I'm not sure I've met somebody yet that does kind of both. But yeah, it is really nice to be able to be at a firm as well where it is, maybe natural resources focused, which is more of what I knew from like undergrad, but we also do a lot of different areas of the law. So you do get a lot of variance in your day and you get to kind of bouncing back and forth between things.
And I think that's important for our, for our listeners, if you're a young lawyer or even if you're in law school, so often, and I had this experience of starting my firm, I was like, all right, I want to do everything. I want to be as broad as possible, but it sometimes is the niche work that allows you to really have a lot of professional success, because if there's, 50 lawyers that do what you do, people can choose one of the 50. If there's 5 or maybe even less in the whole state that do what you do, every person that needs that service is going to be calling to you.
Absolutely. And it gives you a lot of confidence as a young attorney too, I would say, just to be able to kind of, you're not necessarily an expert, 5 years or 6 years out of law school, but you do feel like you have a lot of experience in an area that not a lot of other people might have experience in, and it can give you the confidence to teach a CLE or do something you might not have thought you were capable of doing because of that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always, and don't sell yourself short. You probably know more about, mineral rights as they are impacted in the estate planning and probate process than probably pretty much anyone else in the state, or at least in the, top few. So, that's awesome. That's super awesome. I want to talk a little bit about your firm. So, I guess by Colorado standards, it's mid-sized to maybe a little bit on the larger end. By national standards, it's probably small to mid-sized. What is that like? Do you like working, or what is it like working in an environment, with a fair amount of other employees?
Yeah, I will say it scared me a little bit when I interviewed with them, coming from Oklahoma. The places I interned in law school were very, very small. The first place I interned, I think there were 4 attorneys.
Sure.
If I'm remembering right. And the second one that I interned with, I think there were maybe 10. So interviewing with Wellborn initially and hearing that they had 2 offices, they have a Denver one and a Casper one, I was like, oh my gosh, this is huge and I'm not going to know what to do. I wasn't sure that it would be comfortable for me because I had learned in interning with the small firms that I did like being able to know everybody and like hear about your weekend and know your kids' names, and like that seemed like more of a fit. So I would say nationally, of course, they are pretty small. I think we have 30 some attorneys now, maybe 35 or so. But what's great about my firm is that it does still feel like a family, and that was really, really important to me. People do know, each other's kids' names and what sports they're involved in. So
right.
It's a really nice, it's kind of a mix, not too big.
Awesome. I've only really worked at small firms, so I always kind of wondered, and, obviously I think every firm's culture is different. You could have a 40 lawyer firm where, people don't necessarily know everything about each other. And you could also, have a really big firm where they do. And so it sounds like that you've, kind of found that sweet spot where you got a firm that's kind of large enough that, they have a lot of diverse practice areas. You were able to kind of merge these practice areas into kind of its own kind of unique one. But at the same time, you've still felt like it's your family.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's really important, because the practice of law can be hard or difficult. We talk a lot about burnout and, the mental health of lawyers and, kind of sky high addiction rates. And, I think that having a firm or a place where you work that is supportive and also, feels like a family can really not going to eliminate those issues, but it can really lessen those issues by really feeling valued and kind of having people to talk to and things like that.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference for sure. And I think that's one of the biggest things I would think you should try to focus on when you do your internships in law school, if you get the opportunity, is just to kind of try to figure out what environment fits you best. Because I had the benefit of coming in and interviewing at firms in Denver where I knew nobody, but I at least knew kind of the feel that I was looking for.
Right.
And I also knew that, for example, in a really big firm, I didn't feel like that would be right for me. So
sure.
Having the benefit of at least getting to try those environments out is huge if you can get it.
Right. And I have to bring this back. Did I hear you say that your firm's other office is in Casper?
Yeah.
I maybe we had talked about that before and I just don't remember, but I was born and raised in Casper, so that's great. That's really funny. That's where I guess it makes sense if you're going to do natural resources to have a Wyoming office.
It's the natural pairing for sure.
We definitely have a few resources up in the state to our north.
Yeah.
That's great. Do you get to go up there ever? Like, do you ever do stuff in the Wyoming office or?
No, I'm licensed. Most people in our firm are at least licensed in Colorado and Wyoming and, various other states.
Sure.
But I have yet to go up to our Casper office yet, and I would love to go. It just, the right opportunity hasn't popped up. So someday.
It's an interesting thing. We have some cool stuff up there. We've got you can see Independence Rock. I don't know if you ever played Oregon Trail as a kid.
Oh yeah.
Back in the day.
Like the
little computer game, where you like
about.
if you ford your oxen and then they drowned in the river and things like
Everyone
that.
dies of malaria.
Everyone dies of malaria. So it was really important to get to Independence Rock by a certain date in that game, and you can
clearly
actually go
I never got there
you can actually go see the real Independence Rock.
That's awesome. Good to know.
And we've got the national championships of college rodeo every year are in my town. So
that feels right.
If you like rodeo, go up there, check it out. It's great. The town doubles in size.
Yeah.
For that couple weeks, and it gets real rowdy.
That's awesome.
All right. Well, let's kind of shift gears here today and talk about one of the primary reasons I wanted to have you on, and that was to talk about the Colorado Bar Association Young Lawyers Division, which we are both a part of, and you are currently leading, our fearless leader. Let's talk a little bit about when did you first get involved in the CBA YLD? Was that pretty much right when you got to Colorado, or was it later? Or tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it was later on. My mentor that I mentioned earlier, when she came onto the firm, she was the only one we had at that point doing estate planning, elder law, that kind of thing. So she is the one that actually started taking me to the elder law section meetings to get to know other people in that arena. And she was a couple years out from retirement at that point, but the thought process was always get to meet all of these other people that you can call when you have a question.
Sure.
When I'm retired and don't want to talk to you anymore. She's currently off in Portugal, and the pictures are ridiculous.
Wow.
Anyways,
that's awesome.
Very jealous.
Life goals. Life goals.
Put
that on the bucket list.
For sure. But yeah, she took me, she got me involved, and lo and behold, I think maybe the first or second elder law section meeting we were at, the current young lawyer representative was like, hey, I'm too old. I would like to be done with this. So I volunteered and attended a couple YLD meetings, and I hadn't been in Colorado that long, and it seemed like a really good way to get to know people. That was one of the biggest things I was worried about leaving Oklahoma, and it was more of like a comfort zone type thing, but I knew everybody I graduated with, and Oklahoma's not that big.
Right.
It was going to be really nice to be able to practice and call your friend down the street and, do that whole thing. So I was kind of hoping for a little bit of that where it would feel like I had young attorneys that I knew again and kind of have a little bit more community because we didn't know anybody when we moved up here. So, yeah, it kind of fit the bill. And I attended a couple executive council meetings and talked to a couple people and they mentioned, oh, hey, we're going to have an application soon and we need new people on the board. So it just, one thing kind of led to another. But I ended up enjoying it quite a bit, obviously, chair now. But
sure.
it's been a really good group and got to know a lot of good young attorneys in very different practice areas, which has also been nice. It's nice to step outside of that. And yeah, it's been good.
Well, we're going to continue on with that discussion, but I want to put a quick pin in it because you mentioned one of our buzzwords, and our sound guy, Rick, probably has heard me talk about this almost in every episode, and that was mentorship.
Yeah.
And how important mentorship is. And it sounds like when you first got here, you were able to find a mentor. Talk a little bit about your experience, with a mentor and how has that shaped your practice and kind of your early legal career.
Yeah, I would say to kind of qualify things out, right? I would say my mentor and I didn't intend to necessarily have that relationship, but after we met each other, we got along so well, and it was just a very natural kind of pairing. So I had the benefit of having somebody around that was not only my mentor, but became a really good friend too.
Great.
But it was huge. It definitely shaped the first couple years of my career, got me into a practice area that I didn't know I wanted to be in. And it was just so nice to have a sounding board, both personally and professionally. And to be able to talk to somebody about, what was going to be good for me and what wasn't professionally, and just to have someone there for you really in the field, I think is crucial.
Absolutely. People who have listened to, several of our episodes probably know they're like, Kevin talks about this every single episode. But that's because I really do think it might be the single biggest piece of advice that I can give to young lawyers and law students is you can learn so much. And like you said, it doesn't have to be, like, hey, will you be my mentor? It doesn't have to be anything formal like that. Just And you can have all kinds of different mentors too. And that's what I tell people, like, you just don't want one, right? Like you can have maybe one in your practice area or a couple in your practice area, and maybe one that, has 20 years more experience than you. But also you can have a mentor that has 1 year more experience than you and literally is kind of just a little bit ahead of you on that path. And you can have a mentor that maybe you call for ethical questions. And then maybe you have a mentor and they don't even have to necessarily be a lawyer. Like when you're just struggling with the pressures or the demands and you want someone to talk to you about, mental health or just venting and stuff. Like there's all of these different types of mentors. And like you said, you weren't even necessarily trying to meet one, but you just had a conversation with a person and realized, hey, like we're going to hit it off. And next thing you know, you're learning from that person. And then it sounds like she took you to an elder law section meeting of the CBA with the goal of finding even more mentors. If I'm not here, now you can find these other individuals to kind of help you.
Yeah.
And I really think that is one of the benefits of getting involved in the Bar Association is, obviously we have a mentorship program, camp, if you're looking for a formal one, but you can have so many like informal mentorships. And I think that's something that the bar and the CBA and the CBA YLD can really offer.
I totally agree. I think probably I would say 3 or 4 mentors now. Like you were just talking about, people at different, levels of practice, different ages. And I also have a mentor that's a young attorney. Yeah. I mean, that's absolutely something that the CBA does a really good job of, because once you start making those connections, it just kind of happens naturally. And then you're like, hey, can I just call you for some advice? And all of a sudden you have somebody that you can just reach out to. And that's a big, big deal for sure. I
Absolutely. Agree. And I do it all the time to this day. And people will say, like, how are you able to start your own firm, or how you were able to do this? And I was like, honestly, I got over the fear, or like that I was annoying these people, or whatever, and I still, to this day, I just pick up the phone and call people, like if I'm struggling with an issue, I'll try to solve it myself, do some legal research, sometimes Google it, maybe ask somebody who's sitting next to me at my office. But if I can't find it, rather than just like banging my head against the wall, it's like, just pick up the phone and call somebody, call somebody who's done it before, has a little bit more experience. Sometimes even maybe someone who has less experience, if they've done something, unique, right? Yeah. It's so important. Going back to the CBA YLD. So it sounds like you got out here, you got to these elder law section. There, the young lawyer rep there was kind of rotating off. Mm-hmm. You ended up coming in, attended some meetings, joined the board, or joined the executive council. What are some of the things that you've been a part of kind of on the executive council? Like, what are some of either activities or events or things that you've done?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I've worked on is, and it's kind of an ongoing effort, it's not necessarily an event, but trying to pull in those section reps that are out there, because a lot of times, a section knows that they need to have a young lawyer representative, but just because they put someone in that role doesn't mean they connect them to the executive council, or, really provide them with a lot of tools to do well in that role and get more connected. So I think that's the biggest ongoing effort that I'm the most proud of, is trying to loop those people in. And if they want to be involved with the executive council, give them the tools to do that. And if they want to get more involved in their section, try to support them however we can. If they want to start planning events for their section, if their section, wants to get more involved with law students, for example, the executive council can at least kind of give you the tools to do that and show you how that process works, and just try to get more people involved at the ground level, because I think the most natural entry can be going to your practice area section and starting there. Absolutely.
And it's something I'm on well, I guess you are too. We're both on the CBA, the Big Bar Executive Council now, if you will. And something that I've kind of talked about with them is, sections are often kind of the entry point into the bar. Now, sometimes for a young lawyer, you may go directly to the YLD Executive Council. Yeah. But a lot of people, the sections are the most proximate to them, and it's the area where, people are kind of entering the bar. And so I think the work that you've been doing is really important, because there's all these different cool groups, sections, there's a few committees, different titles and stuff, but they're all doing all this really cool work. But sometimes they can be kind of like compartmentalized. And if you don't have, it's really kind of like an ambassador, if you will, or like a representative. If you don't have somebody that is, connecting group A to group B, you miss out on all of these cool opportunities to put on events together and put on, whether it's an event or a CLE or a mental health thing, a wellness, health and stuff. There's all these kind of cool things that people can work together, but it only really works if they're talking to each other, or they have somebody who can, kind of attend both meetings and kind of, bring the messages back and forth, if you will. Right.
Exactly. I mean, that's a huge thing. And that's something that I think sometimes the sections might not appreciate either, is that, the YLD's out there doing what they're doing, and the sections, I think, just kind of tend to keep rolling. They have their things that they do year to year, and so it's easy for them to get into a groove. But if they have a young attorney coming in that wants to make that connection between the two and try to connect programming or do things together, it can be a big change from what the section is used to.
Right. And it can be mutually, beneficial. I think that Corporate America talks a lot about like having diversity of thought leading to better outcomes. And, if you're a section and you've been kind of doing it your own way, and it could be working, but if you're doing it your own way and it's been a while, been a couple years since someone kind of had like a fresh idea.
Right.
And same with the YLD. We don't have the most experience in the world. We're all young lawyers, literally by definition. And so, we may have an idea that has been done before and like hasn't necessarily worked.
Right.
And so if you have, if you can kind of, integrate with a section to be like, hey, I know you guys have that idea, but 6 years ago, trust me, we tried it. It doesn't work. It sounds good, but it's, these are the issues. You can either learn and be like, okay, these are the things we need to address, or hey, let's try a different idea.
Yeah, tapping into that experience can also be really helpful for sure, because the more input you have from all of these different groups, I think the better everyone else gets, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, and I think a great example of this interaction that we had last year was we did the real estate section was putting on a large like kind of seminar thing, and they wanted to really focus on civil rights and race and things like that. And those are topics generally that you're going to look to young lawyers more as leadership, because, young people generally, by and large, if you look at all the civil rights movements, all the major change movements, they're almost always led by young people who kind of have the fresh eyes to kind of look at things. And so we were in a position where the YLD had a lot of really good connections to speakers who could speak about diversity issues, and could speak about discrimination in housing, and who could speak about all of these kind of issues. And the real estate group section had the idea. They knew it was important for their members and they wanted to put it on, but they didn't necessarily have the connections to execute it. Right. And so by partnering with the YLD, we were able to, get in front of an audience that the YLD maybe normally wouldn't speak to, and lawyers of all ages. But the real estate section was able to get the YLD's connections, and we were able to put on like a really cool event.
Yeah.
So I do think, especially, so I guess the advice here would be, if you're involved in, one thing with the CBA, you can also get involved in other things, or you can look for these kind of opportunities to be a liaison or an ambassador, if you will, and kind of bring these different groups together. And it sounds like that's really kind of been your focus a lot when you've been on the YLD.
Yeah, I think it's really important for young attorneys to realize that, even if your entry point is a section, or whether it's the YLD or something else, the CBA has so much going on in so many different arenas.
It's quite large.
There's not just sections. There's not just the YLD. There are so many groups where so many cool things are happening. And if you get plugged in one spot, chances are you're going to start to see that. But once you've gotten plugged in, all you have to do is go talk to somebody, right? It's so easy to reach out and say, oh, hey, this group's doing this. I would love to be involved. Like, there's just so many opportunities. It's endless.
Absolutely. So you joined the YLD. You started doing this work with the sections and things like that. And what made you decide to want to run for a leadership position and throw your name in the hat, if you will, for chair-elect, and now obviously you're chair?
Yeah. It was just mostly, honestly, out of appreciation for what the YLD has done for me in the time that I've been in it, to be perfectly honest.
Sure.
It's a group that absolutely focuses on giving back to, our community, which is young attorneys. And that's something that's super, super important to me. And in the time that I've been involved with it, it was really what I needed to start to feel comfortable here in a new state with, jumping into an area that I just didn't know, and I didn't really know anybody. And to have those professional connections that have grown out of what has started with getting involved with the YLD has been huge. So wanting to be chair was essentially just for me wanting to give back a little bit more to this organization that's given so much to me.
And what does the kind of the chair do? So obviously you serve on the CBA Executive Committee, so the kind of big bar Executive Committee as the rep from the YLD. But what are kind of the other things that the chair does, or what's kind of the chair's role in the organization? Yeah,
so when you step into the chair role, you're kind of stepping back a little bit to the extent that you want to, from necessarily planning all the events that we do and that we host. And it's more about facilitating at that point, I would say, relationships and making sure that, our committees and committee chairs and members have what they need to do their jobs and do it well. So it's more of kind of a facilitation role, I would say. But you can also still stay involved at the levels you want to stay involved in. But you're essentially at that point getting involved with the CBA on a bigger level, stepping into a role on their executive council. And there's various other committees and councils that you get a seat on as CBA YLD chair. So you're kind of the face of the YLD to other parts of the CBA. You're kind of reporting to them on what's going on with us, but you're also making sure that our executive council is operating as it needs to.
Talk a little bit about, so obviously your year as chair-elect and then chair kind of got thrown for a loop there. I'm sure you're aware we have this global pandemic going on.
Yeah,
it's been in the news. It's been in the news a little bit. So, what you thought might have been 2 kind of normal years of service quickly became a whole different world as we've all been dealing with COVID and things like that. So, what has the YLD done, or how has it kind of shifted to be able to kind of still provide value to its members and opportunities for learning and networking, all this kind of different stuff during the time of COVID?
Yeah, so the pivot that really happened during our prior chair, Spencer Rubin's year, that was 2020. That was kind of where everything changed. But it took away a little bit from what our executive council typically would do bonding-wise. But other than that, the way we've been able to shift towards virtual programming and reaching out however we can to our members, I think we've done a pretty good job of that. It's been difficult for sure, and it's forced our committees to pivot, but some of it has been as simple as our CLEs are now online, which your committee is doing a great job of. So some of that, wasn't so hard to switch over, and some of it, like our public service committee, it's been a little bit more challenging. It's just kind of what can you make virtual versus what do you have to kind of rethink entirely and try to pivot into something else. So it's definitely, it's been challenging. It's definitely been something that we've had to reevaluate constantly. I would say we're talking about it probably almost at every meeting. Is this still working? Do we need to be doing something differently? But it's something the bar is struggling with as a whole as well. It's something that everybody is, I think, just having to constantly think about.
And not to toot our own horn too much here, but I will say that I think that the YLD specifically, and I don't know if it was because as younger lawyers we grew up with technology, and so we were just a little bit more comfortable just kind of diving in.
Yeah.
And all of the different sections have adjusted in their own way, but I will say specifically the YLD, in my view, has really gone above and beyond and offered as many opportunities as we can to our members. I mean, even especially last year, we were doing so many different events, and this year we've also done quite a few, to still keep people engaged and still kind of offer, that value.
Yeah, I think that's something that maybe we didn't really foresee as a group, but I agree with you. I think that whether it's because we're, younger or whatnot, we've been able to lead in a lot of areas that have been good examples for the rest of the bar to say, hey, you can do something this way. And it's, again, leaning on each other for that experience in different groups to be able to say, oh, well, the YLD has been able to do this. Maybe we can too. Right.
Absolutely. So I guess as we kind of wrap up our YLD conversation, what recommendations do you have for young lawyers or law students that want to get involved? Do they have to, start by joining the CBA YLD Executive Committee? Are there other ways they can kind of get involved if they're maybe not quite ready to take that leap or don't necessarily know what that leap entails? What are good ways for them to kind of get involved?
Yeah, I would say it depends on the person. If you're headed towards a certain practice area, your section is a really natural place to get plugged in for sure. The executive council is also a great place to get plugged in. If you get plugged in as a liaison, you naturally get involved with us now, which is cool. But I think the biggest thing is just reaching out to people that who have been involved in the CBA in some capacity, and try to start talking to people. See if it sounds like a good fit for you. I think personally at least, getting involved at any level is really rewarding for me. It has been for sure, just to be able to build that community with other attorneys, not just people that I know from work. So if you can get plugged in, if you can reach out to somebody and start having that conversation, they're going to get you plugged in somewhere. And then you can kind of go from there.
Absolutely. And I want to give a special plug to, if anyone is listening in the greater Colorado area.
Yeah.
We are always looking for more people who want to get involved in the greater Colorado area. And I know that both the Big Bar and the YLD have made that a focus over the years. But it's really hard. And we do have some great greater Colorado members, but we could always use more, because it's hard to know what greater Colorado needs or what they would want from an event or from an idea or a mission or whatever it's going to be, without having those people on the board. So
absolutely.
If you are, somewhere outside the Denver metro area and you're thinking, hey, is this only for Denver lawyers or is this only for people that can appear in person? What we have learned through the pandemic, and one good thing I think is that, even meetings that are majority in person, like, you can have a virtual aspect to it, so that people
absolutely.
from Grand Junction, the Springs, Pueblo, Eastern Plains, all over, can be an active part of this board, and honestly would be super helpful and better for us, but also I think better for Greater Colorado if we can get more of those people involved. So if you're listening and you live out there, come join us.
Absolutely. That's one thing the CBA has really taken to heart over the past 2 years, and has invested in by upgrading their tech at the offices to make it, it's not just where you're dialing in and the conference call line is not good. Mm-hmm. We can't hear you. We can see you now. We can hear you really well. With the virtual options have really, I think, made that even more possible for those greater Colorado folks.
It is crazy how much better it is today
it's
than
wild.
Like the old, you call into a conference call line and you can barely hear anything.
Oh,
no one knows when you want to talk. And now we have cameras that move and can look at you, and it's
fancy.
It's insane. Yeah, it's insane. It's fancy. It's fancy. 5-10 years from now, we'll all be wearing virtual reality, and we'll be in the metaverse meeting. So,
absolutely.
Thanks, Mark Zuckerberg. Anyway, I have a few more questions for you to wrap up our episode. And I've been doing this recently with all of our guests because I do know that we have some law student listeners, and law school can be really scary, especially 1L year. 1L year can be especially crazy as you're kind of getting to the swing of everything. So what is one thing that you wish you knew as a 1L that you know now? If you could go back and tell 1L Mallory something, what would it be?
God, that list is so long.
I know. So many good, tough question.
I would say the biggest thing that I have learned that I would tell myself now is to really pay attention to what you like and you don't like. And what I mean by that is the first internship I ever had was miserable. Did not like it. Hated the area of law. Didn't know anything about it. Sorry, everyone, but it was family law. And I didn't realize that I could have just quit that job.
Yeah, not done it. Not done it.
I didn't know that I could say no. And so I think as a 1L, I think you are under a lot of pressure to do all these different things, to get involved in all these different things. And I think it's really important to start paying attention to what actually makes you happy and what actually is fulfilling for you, and to start saying no to all of those other things.
That's great advice. That is really good advice. And I also have done just a little bit of family law. And I know we have a lot of family law attorneys, and this is not anything against that. And we've had a lot of family law attorneys on this very podcast. But not for me. Not for me.
Same.
But I'm sure they would be like, yeah, there's no way I could do personal injury, no way I could do criminal defense and stuff. So everyone's got their own thing. But I think that's great advice. Great advice. Feel free to say no. And it's okay to not only find what you like, but also to identify what you don't like and be like, yeah, that's not for me.
Yep.
Okay. One more question here for you.
Yeah.
So if we have young lawyers or law students that are listening and they are interested in getting into kind of the oil and gas law realm.
Yeah.
What advice do you, obviously you had a little bit of experience in undergrad, but, not everyone may have that. Maybe they did go the poli-sci route or something like that.
Yeah.
What kind of things in law school can they be doing to kind of break into that realm?
I would say the classes you can take near that area, and I say that knowing that like not every law school has oil and gas law, for example.
Sure.
But the land classes that you can take, and I would say the more practical experience you can get, the better. If you can get any type of internship working as a landman, for example, just having that base experience is really important in this field because it gets technical real quick.
Mm-hmm.
And so anything you can do to get that base knowledge to be able to kind of talk the talk, even coming into it, is huge.
There's probably a lot of people listening being like, what is a landman?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
If you don't know that might be a good place to start.
Exactly. Yeah. Getting, if you can get any experience at like a title company, for example, that's also a really good place to start, even if it isn't oil and gas specific. But the more land experience you can get, the better. And it doesn't have to be at the legal level, for sure.
And I don't know if DU, I'm assuming they probably do. I know CU has a lot of oil and gas classes and stuff. And it
tends to be area specific, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I always like to end the same way, especially because we always talk about mentorship. If anyone was listening and wants to talk about the YLD or oil and gas law or probate law, or I'll be sad that Lincoln Riley left Oklahoma.
Oh my God! Don't even get me started.
Just commiserate about that. If they want to reach out to you, one, is that okay? And two, is the best way to contact you email or?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep. Email, LinkedIn, however you can find me. I would give out my cell phone number, but
no,
that seems a little weird.
Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't do that.
No,
but,
I'm embarrassingly easy to find. And I am always happy to chat. If anybody wants to chat about literally anything, it doesn't have to be related to, YLD or what I do at all. I really understand the value of having somebody you can just reach out and chat with, and I'm happy to be that person.
Well, there you go, listeners. Another opportunity of a great person to kind of connect with. Mallory, it's been a real pleasure having you on the podcast. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks, you too.
Get legal with it.